good.
Do you need a map?
No, thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Your auto tape tour guide. We're about to start our trip through Rocky Mountain National Park, where we'll see some of the world's most breathtaking natural wonders. To get the most from your auto tape tour, you should try to maintain a speed of around 30 miles an hour. Whenever you stop at a recommended viewpoint, or any place where a panoramic scene or animal catches your fancy, please remember to turn me off. And keep me turned off till you resume driving along the tour path. In this way, you'll be sure that what your ears are hearing corresponds to what your eyes are seeing. At this time, we are headed for sign number 11, Farview Curve, where we'll start our tour. Incidentally, on this tour, there are 10 viewpoints or stops recommended. Each is marked along the road by numeral signs in the shape of the National Park Service arrowhead emblem. So, are you ready for some historical and general information about this world-famous park? Okay, we'll start at the beginning. Rocky Mountain National Park was first opened in 1915. Since then, its boundaries have been changed 4 times. It is now 30 miles long and from 15 to 24 miles wide. That, if my arithmetic is right, means 412 square miles of rugged gorges, splashing waterfalls, peaks and valleys sculpted by nature, and a fascinating variety of wild creatures that call this area home. As you probably figured out, Rocky Mountain National Park got its name from its location in the front range of the Rocky Mountains. If you cared to count, you'd find that in this park there are 65 named peaks, all more than 10,000 feet high. 42 of them reach 12,000 feet towards the sky, and 18 rise to a height of 13,000 or more feet. Long's Peak, the king of them all, stretches mightily to a height of 14,255 feet. Even at the foot of these towering giants, the altitude is about 8,000 feet, the equivalent of 1.5 miles above sea level. The road we're on now is the famous Trail Ridge Road. By the time you reach the other end of this road, you'll have experienced driving at an elevation of 12,183 feet. It is the highest continuous automobile road in all of the United States. Before it was a paved road, it was a trail used by the Ute and the Arapaho Indians. Speaking of Indians, it's believed that the first Indians reached the vicinity of Rocky Mountain National Park between 10 and 20,000 years ago. Exactly who these first comers were is not yet known, and the only evidence of such early existence comes from some artifacts recently found in the park. These artifacts have been estimated by archaeologists to be about 8,000 years old, and it is generally believed that this is far from the earliest civilization in the vicinity. At the time the Ute and Arapaho Indians were using this trail for hunting expeditions, there were numerous Indian trails here, but only 3 stretched across from Estes Park to Grand Lake. Those trails were called Dog or Fall River Trail, Big or Flat Top Trail, and Ridge or Child's Trail. The first 2 were shorter, but more dangerous routes to travel. Child's Trail was longer, but easier to follow. The present Trail Ridge Road, the one you're cruising along now, follows practically the same route as the original Child's Trail. Trail Ridge Road, started in 1929 and completed in 1932, is a little more than 42 miles long. It was possible to build the road in this 4-year period because of extremely mild weather conditions. Its opening in 1932 was 1 year ahead of schedule. The cost of building this road was about $50,000 a mile. a real bargain by today's rates. Pioneers were slow to settle in this region. Neither Pony Express riders nor cattle drivers came here. There were some explorers and French-speaking trappers, but the first known white settlers were Joel Estes and his family. The next known settlers in the park were James Nugent, alias Rocky Mountain Jim, and Griffith J. Evans, whose home became the first shelter for tourists, such as the celebrated English authoress Isabella Lucy Bird. Miss Bird's book, A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains, describes her experiences in Estes Park during the fall of 1873. Sometime before December of 1873, when Miss Bird left the Rocky Mountains, a new figure made his appearance in the vicinity. An enterprising Irish nobleman, the Earl of Dunraven, saw a tremendous opportunity here. In some way, he linked up with Griffith Evans in a plot to secure as much land as possible in order to establish a European feudal system and become an American lord. 6 months after Miss Bird's departure, Griffith Evans shot James Nugent. The supposition is that Evans shot Nugent because the latter stood in the way of Dunraven's gaining complete control of the area. Strong-willed and determined, the Earl dominated the lives and activities of the people in Estes Park for 2 decades. In 1874, he formed the Estes Park Company Limited and tried to cover up one of the most underhanded land swindles in the history of Colorado. Eventually, through bogus homestead claims and some purchases, Dunraven gained control of about 15,000 acres of land. The hostility of the permanent settlers who came to the park in 1874 and 75 caused them to formally contest Dunraven's claims, and over the years, they won their case. After Dunraven lost between $200,000 and $300,000, his company in 1907 sold the remainder of his holdings, 6,600 acres, to D.B. Sanborn and F.O. Stanley of Stanley steamer fame. The plans of these men were as different from those of Dunraven as day is from night. These two brilliant businessmen saw the existing raw natural beauty as a thing to be preserved and cherished, and not as a feudal domain to be ravished for their own selfish needs. The actual establishment of Rocky Mountain National Park is historically linked with the efforts of one man, Enos A. Mills, a famous naturalist. His enthusiasm, writings, and lectures laid the groundwork, which ultimately led to legislation in 1915 setting aside this outstanding area for use and enjoyment by people from all over the world. Imagine how Enos Mills must have felt when he participated in the dedication ceremony for Rocky Mountain National Park at Horseshoe Park in September 1915. The blue stream to your left is the headwater branch of the Colorado River, and the valley into which it flows is the Kawanichi Valley. The naming of this valley, incidentally, is a perfect illustration of how to confuse the public by changing names. Its workaday name was, and is, the North Fork Valley. A pretty perfect name for a valley located in the North Fork of the Colorado River, right? Wrong. When the park was being ready for its initial opening, the Colorado Geographic Board must have decided the valley needed a more colorful name. So, in they came with a bag full of Arapaho Indian words they settled on and recommended it to be called Hakihana Valley, meaning Valley of the Wolves. Hakihana was also the name of an extinct tribe that lived with the northern Arapaho Indians. Confident that the name would be accepted, R.B. Marshall printed it on the first map of the park, published in 1915 by the Denver Chamber of Commerce. Meanwhile, the Colorado Geographic Board had a change of mind and decided to call it Kawanichi Valley, because that name was, in their words, somewhat more pronounceable. Perhaps so, but it wasn't even a real word. This invented name was derived from Ka'unachi, an Arapaho word. So while the first and authentic map of the new park identifies it as the Hokihana Valley, and locals call it North Fork Valley, its official name today is Kawanichi Valley, a loose translation of an Arapaho word meaning coyote. There are, of course, a good number of coyotes in the valley and throughout the park even today, but they're more frequently heard than seen. If you haven't already heard their wild, eerie yipping sound, you'll recognize the coyote yowl when you hear this. Shy and elusive by nature, coyotes are accustomed to an unmolested existence. They withdraw when approached closely and are adept at disappearing swiftly. Other animals who live but are seldom seen in the park are bear, bobcats, cougar, and foxes. Occasionally, a bear makes an appearance on a campground at night. A bear which has become adjusted to life among humans, like those in Yellowstone, can be a nuisance, may even be dangerous. It's fortunate in a way that we have so few of them. If you should see a bobcat, it would probably be along the roadside at night. Fox are extremely rare on the east side of the park, but appear in some numbers along the Kawanichi Valley on the west side. And the cougar, or mountain lion, can usually be counted on to disappear when people are around. It seems almost pointless to tell you this, but in case you were worried, I want to assure you there are absolutely no poisonous snakes in the park. In fact, the only snake in the park is the perfectly harmless garter snake. One of the most interesting stories relating to the era of the roaming Indians is the tragic massacre of the Ute Indians on the shores of Grand Lake by the Arapaho tribe. How much of this is poetry and how much is fact is hard to determine, but this is the way I heard it. Many moons before the white man came here, an unexpected violent storm came over Shadow Mountain, terrifying the Utes encamped along the north shore of Grand Lake. Ute scouts, terrified by the awesome sight of blood-red clouds, abandoned their posts on Lookout Rock, crept back to camp, and joined the other braves and squaws huddled in fear, not knowing what to do about this strange, whipping storm. Suddenly, out of the unnatural darkness, for it was still afternoon, they heard a clear cry of the whippoorwill. The Utes recognized it as the battle cry of the Marauding Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians, led by Chief Red Wolf, a warrior of great renown. Unprepared for this onslaught, the squaws hurriedly poled out to the middle of the lake with their papooses, while the braves fought nobly in the drenching rain, led by their chief, Chickawaw. Close to 80 Utes lay dead as the two chiefs engaged in mortal combat. When Red Wolf's spear was shattered, the valiant Chickawaw refused to fight an unarmed foe. He cast his spear to the ground, and both drew their hunting knives and continued the battle. Both braves were covered with blood when Chief Chickawaw's blade pierced Red Wolf's heart. 2 weakened to last longer, Chickawaw also fell, dying alongside the foe he'd just slain. At that moment, a treacherous wind tore across the lake, screaming as it overturned the raft and sent helpless Ute squaws and papooses to the bottom of the lake. As the victorious Arapahoes withdrew after the slaughter to lick their wounds, a Ute runner sped home to summon another band of Utes. They rushed to the lake, viewed the carnage, and pursued the Arapaho up Trail Ridge, finally killing their new leader, Chief Black Wolf, and all his braves. Chief Chekawau's death was avenged, but the sorrow for the loss of their women and children could not give the sad youths a feeling of happiness from their victory. They returned to Grand Lake quietly to bury their dead, and thereafter avoided Grand Lake, calling it Spirit Lake, because to them it is haunted by the souls of the dead. One summer morning, not long ago, I was standing at the lake, and as the sun reached the eastern shore, a chill went through me as I saw the spirit-like vapors rise into the air. You go there on an early summer morning, and perhaps you too will call it Spirit Lake after that. About this time, on your left, we should be looking at the Never Summer Mountains. The Never Summer Mountains were not in the original boundaries of the park. The Arapaho Indians called this serrated range a Chibi-Chiyu. Its literal translation is Never No Summer. The United States Geological Survey thought the Indian word too difficult for Americans to pronounce and found the double negative translation into English offensive. So, they settled on Never Summer Mountain instead of Never No Summer Mountain. Frankly, I don't see no difference. Along this road, there's a trail which will take you to an abandoned mining town. What happened was, during the 1880s, a mining boom on the west side of the park led to the establishment of Dutchtown, Teller, and Lulu City. From the outset, there was controversy about which girl was so popular that a whole city was named after her. Some old-timers contend it was the daughter of Benjamin Franklin Burnett, one of the founders of Lulu City. Others insist it was Lulu Stewart, daughter of a local mailman. This has never been settled. And in fact, the argument outlasted the city. Today, there's very little left of Lulu City. A few foundations, a couple of buildings, that's about all. Except maybe some mighty good fishing in that area. Have you noticed along this portion of Trail Ridge Road, there are several trailhead markers and parking areas where it's possible for you to leave the car and to take a hike? Actually, you miss much of the inspirational beauty of Rocky Mountain National Park if your sightseeing is confined to those parts of the park reachable only by car. Looking at the park from a paved road is a one-dimensional experience compared to what you feel when you go inland and put yourself in the midst of all this rustic, pristine beauty. There are over 300 miles of trails in the park. Most of them can be traveled by horseback, but a few trails leading to more remote areas are suitable for foot travel only. Horses may be rented at hotels, lodges, and camps near the park. Several campgrounds within the park accommodate visitors who want to live outdoors and closer to nature. The major park campgrounds are at Moraine Park, Glacier Basin, Aspen Glen, Longs Peak, and Timber Creek. And if you're thinking about staying in a campground tonight, Timber Creek is closest to where you are right now. The campgrounds all have fireplaces for cooking, but wood gathering in the park is prohibited, so you have to bring in your own wood. They also have sanitary facilities and water. House trailers are permitted at most of the campgrounds, but they must be self-contained since there are no sewer or electrical hookups available and no direct water connections. Pets, such as cats and dogs, must be kept leashed or confined and are permitted in the park only in areas where vehicles are permitted. So Fido is going to have to forget backpacking the Rockies this time around. The cabins you see along this road are private inholdings claimed before the park was established. There are some private roads leading to private homes on land that has not yet been purchased by the government. Several years ago, there were many more of them than there are today. Before Rocky Mountain National Park was officially established in 1915, some 11,000 acres, which make up the park as we know it, were privately held. Geologically, Rocky Mountain National Park is a constant reminder of the overwhelming power of nature. What carved the magnificent mountains of the Front Range? What caused the smooth and gentle slopes of Trail Ridge, the U-shaped valley, the up-tilted rock strata? It all started maybe 100 million years ago when a great sea covered much of this national park. Subtropical forests lined the shores. Animal life consisted of giant reptiles in the sea and on land, and flying reptiles in the air. As these animals died, their bones and remains fossilized and became trapped in sedimentary layers of sand and silt brought down from the low hills. The sand, silt, and mud hardened into rock layers of sandstone and shale. All this took centuries to happen. Then, suddenly, great forces within the earth caused a gigantic lifting of the land under the sea. The land buckled, and the old sea floor was uplifted and formed a long range, looking something like a wrinkle in a carpet. Rock layers were fractured, and the fractures became faults as the rock layers slipped or were thrust along the fracture zones. Through some of the fractures, molten lava oozed up from the Earth's interior and formed lavas on the surface and granite beneath the surface. All this, over a period of millions of years, were the beginnings of the Front Range. As time went on, this highland was slowly worn down by water, wind, and freezing action, until most of the sea-laid rock layer and lavas were eroded away from the high center of the range, exposing the more ancient crystalline rocks, the schists and gneiss that formed the core. Through continued erosion, the surface of these mountains was slowly reduced to a rolling upland. The gentle slopes you will find at the top of Trail Ridge is a remnant of this erosional stage. But at the end of the Mesozoic era and continuing into the Cenozoic, some 40 to 60 million years ago, another series of uplifts raised the eroding mountain range, giving the streams renewed vigor and allowing them to carve deeper and sharper valleys. Then about a million years ago, the climate grew colder and the Ice Age began. Giant snowdrifts compacted into ice, forming glaciers of tremendous size. The slow, ponderous down-valley movement of the glaciers holding tons of rock debris in their masses of ice, sculptured the sharp valley bottoms into U-shapes. As the glaciers moved down the valleys, loose rock material carried by the ice was deposited along the sides, forming lateral moraines. At the ends of the glaciers, ice-carried rocks were dumped to form terminal moraines. As we've already seen and will continue to see, there are many excellent examples of moraines in the park. Other evidences of glaciation, such as ice-polished rocks, erratic boulders, and marks called striations, can be plainly seen in many places. There are many fine small glaciers or glaciers in the park, but for obvious reasons, no trail or road has been built close to them. The earth history of Rocky Mountain National Park is truly a story of gigantic earth movements, eons of building and wearing away. As nature continues to alter and redesign our earth, no doubt thousands of years from now, Rocky Mountain National Park as we see it today will look entirely different. Stop, Farview Curve, we're almost certain to see some of the park's wildlife. In fact, I'd almost bet that we'll be greeted by chipmunks and golden-mantled ground squirrels. Both rodents, as well as some members of the crow family, are notorious little beggars. Chipmunks and ground squirrels are hard to tell apart. Both are reddish-brown above, with white underparts, and have 4 white stripes running along their backs. Both sound like this. The main distinguishing feature is the very definite, very visible white stripe across the face of the chipmunk. As for the members of the crow family, here is the sound by which you can identify them. It is the sound of the Steller's jay, the gray jay, and the Clark's nutcracker. The gray jay, sometimes known as the Rocky Mountain jay or camp robber, has a dull gray body, light gray head, and short bill. It pals around with the Clark's nutcracker, which has a longer bill, light gray body, and white patches on black wings and tail. The Steller's jay isn't so common at Farview Curve. You'd recognize it by its rich blue wings, sharp crest, and saucy manner. All 3 birds are about the same size. Across the Kawanichi Valley from Farview Curve, on the slopes of the Never Summer, is a cleared line that appears to be a roadway. Actually, it's an irrigation ditch which carries water from the Pacific drainage slopes and empties it across the Continental Divide to supply irrigated lands on the eastern plains. Built over 75 years ago, the 14-mile ditch helps the farmers around Fort Collins who need it in late summer for the last irrigation of the sugar beets. Ditches like the Grand Ditch have turned what Major Stephen H. Long once called the Great American Desert into the Sugar Bowl of America. We're getting to Farview Curve now, so please turn me off till we leave.
And that is Farview Curve.
We're leaving Farview Curve, heading for our next stop, the Continental Divide. Those distant mountains to the south are members of the Gore Range. The slope just to our right here is Jackstraw Mountain. The child's game of jackstraws, later commercialized and called pickup sticks, consists of tossing many slivers of wood into a heap, then delicately trying to remove one without disturbing the others. This mountain looks like a giant game of jackstraws, with its dead trees standing upright or crazily jumbled as they were left by a fire in 1872. It's believed that this fire was one of several set by the Ute Indians to drive the white man out. The white pioneers were killing so much game that the Utes feared their source of food would be exhausted. After some important powwows, Chief Colorado, the chubby Ute leader, set fires designed to burn the settlers' homes on the eastern slopes. The story is that the wind changed, blew the fire to the timbered hills where the Utes lived, and destroyed their entire settlement. Closer to the Continental Divide, one of you is likely to ask aloud or to yourself, just what is the Continental Divide? It's not as complicated to understand as many textbooks make out. The Continental Divide separates water drainage to the Atlantic and the Pacific. If a drop of water falls to the west side of the Great Divide, it will eventually find its way to the Pacific. If another drop falls right next to it, but is on the east side of the divide, it will become part of the Atlantic. The Great Divide runs from Alaska almost to Cape Horn. When we get to Milner Pass, stop sign number 10, you'll see the Cache La Poudre River. At Milner Pass, it drains into the Platte, which joins the Missouri, flows into the Mississippi, and finally finds its way to the Gulf of Mexico, a part of the Atlantic Ocean. On the other side of the divide, Beaver Creek drains into the Colorado River, which flows through Grand Canyon National Park and spills into the Gulf of California, part of the Pacific Ocean. So now you know what is meant by the Continental or Great Divide. The Gore Mountain Range, which I mentioned before, see it far south there, was named after an Irish baronet, Sir H. George Gore. A wealthy eccentric, he hired the fabulous and legendary Jim Bridger to be his guide when he came to the Rockies in the 1880s. Bridger, one of the finest guides and scouts in the West, is probably best remembered for his affinity for tall stories. It's not that he lied, he just embroidered the truth a bit. Although it was generally
Like
known
Irene
that
is to the
Bridger,
left.
a strapping 6'4" powerhouse, fought bears barehanded, there is some doubt that for 4 days, in sub-zero weather, he lived in the wilderness, in the nude, while escaping some Sioux Indians. Bridger, no doubt, was one of the Westerners who spread some of the wildly delightful stories about his Irish nobleman employer. We don't know how much of this is truth, but here's what we heard. The baronet's entourage numbered 40. His equipment included what today we call a camper, a bedroom built into a wagon. Each day, his personal valet supervised a bucket brigade as they filled Gore's portable bathtub. When the Irish sportsman was too lazy to mount a horse but wanted to shoot, he'd send his retinue to herd the game toward his tent door, where he would shoot without rising. It has been said that Gore slaughtered so much game that the animal population in the Gore Range has never returned to normal. Like many stories told by or about the Irish, the Sir George Gore stories may not be entirely true, but they certainly are colorful, dramatic, and interesting. We should just be getting to our next stop, sign number 10. So turn me off now, and turn me on again when we leave the parking area.
This is Milner Pass, stop 10.
This section of Trail Ridge Road is a popular spot with mule deer and American elk, and you might see one, or a herd, especially towards evening. Because of the abundance of moisture here, wildflower gardens of rare beauty burst out in these forests during the summer. Here, the Blue Rocky Mountain columbine seems to flourish best. The imagination of the Indians wove this striking flower into many legends. One of the most popular is attributed to the Ute Indians, and it goes something like this. Stern but great leader, Chief White Snow showed affection only for one papoose, Broad Brow. His little girl papoose, Blue Flower, and his faithful squaw never received a smile. One day, little Broad Brow was stolen by the daring Sioux, and despite prolonged efforts, was never recovered. The kidnapping of Broad Brow caused Chief White Snow to become more cruelly stern to his squaw and Blue Flower. His uncomplaining squaw died when Blue Flower was only 6 years old. Suddenly, Chief White Snow seemed to realize for the first time that he'd never given the affection and kind words so greatly needed by his family. His disposition changed. He grew affectionate, and he lavished Blue Flower with his love. He abandoned long hunts and war so that he might be near the little girl. At 12, Blue Flower was a sweet, lovely young maiden. That spring, great snows fell, and many of Chief White Snow's tribe died. Neither sacrifices nor solemn songs led Manitow, their god, to stay the sweep of death. The chief aged with care. Night and day he prayed, "O Manitow, take not my little Blue Flower from me." But death continued to plague the tribe. In desperation, Chief White Snow tried to escape and save his daughter's life by leaving his valley. They started across the high San Juan Mountains, hoping to find a warm, healthy valley on the other side. Just before reaching timberline, a fierce snowstorm overwhelmed them. For hours, snow piled down on them. When the storm subsided, everything was deeply buried and the mountains were hidden in white. The next summer, some passing Indians saw a strange but beautiful white and blue flower growing in the moist earth by a snowbank. The blue and white Rocky Mountain columbine. And so the legend ends. Typically Indian, the story has no moral, just magic. Actually, over 750 plant varieties have been found in Rocky Mountain National Park. Many are lush and colorful and so admired that they've been domesticated by commercial nurseries. Seeds and directions for growing these plants in your garden may be obtained commercially. So, no matter how tempting it is, please don't pick the flowers. Park rangers strictly enforce regulations prohibiting the picking, defacing, or destroying of all park foliage. Specimen Mountain, looming up in the west there, was once called by the Arapaho Indians the mountain that smokes. Since geologists doubt that any Indians were around when this mountain of volcanic materials was being formed, it's a little hard to understand where they came up with the name. But its appearance today testifies geologically to its volcanic origin. Specimen Mountain was formed by layers and layers of erupting volcanic ash, glass, lava, mud flows, breccia, and pumice, all of which came from an active and very powerful volcano located somewhere to the west. Its name, Specimen Mountain, appears on an 1882 township map. The specimens are gemstones, opals, agates, chalcedony, and black obsidian. Don't try to collect any of these as souvenirs. Collecting is prohibited in national parks, so that generations to come will be able to share the same natural wonders that you have seen. Another mountain we'll see from Medicine Bow Curve is the one we call Medicine Bow Mountain. It stretches into Wyoming, but in that state they call it the Snowy Range, because the 10,000-foot peneplain of the Medicine Bow Mountains is topped by a range of crystalline quartzite that glistens like snow. In a few minutes, we'll reach timberline, the line of trees. This is the place where trees and the elements, wind and rain, snow and cold, are in constant battle for supremacy and survival. The elements always win. You'll recognize timberline by the battle-scarred trees. Dwarfed and soul-torn, the trees on the fringe give way to the treeless expansion of tundra, the flower-rich meadowland which grows above the limit of trees. At an altitude of about 11,000 feet, the rigorous tundra climate is similar to that of northern Alaska or Siberia. As mentioned before, severe weather conditions can be expected along Trail Ridge any time during the year. It's not uncommon to have a blizzard here in the summer, and because of the ever-present wind, the chill factor up here can be equivalent to midwinter at the same time the temperature down in Estes Park is in the 80s. Oddly, there are times when weather conditions below are nasty, while up here it is beautiful. Sometimes, when we're driving this 11-mile stretch that runs through tundra country, we are actually driving above the clouds.
This is Medicine Bow Mountain. Turn off.
Now. At our next stop, Fall River Pass, sign number 8, we will be approximately at the midway point on the Trail Ridge Road, and we'll be getting deep into tundra country. You really should spend some time in the Alpine Visitor Center at Fall River Pass. There you'll see some alpine tundra displays that can't be seen in any other museum in the world. At Fall River Pass, you'll also find the gift shop, cafeteria, and restrooms. From the parking area at the pass, you'll be able to get an excellent view of the headwaters of the Fall River and the old Fall River Road. This old road, I'll tell you more about it later, joins the road we're on just beyond the Alpine Visitor Center. In a second, you can turn me off. After you do, please flip me over to side 2. Just follow directions on the cassette. Then, when we leave Fall River Pass and you turn me on again, we'll be ready to continue our auto tape tour.
This is Fall River Pass Alpine Visitor Center.
As we pull out of Fall River Pass, check your mileage gauge. 1 4/10 miles from here, we'll cross the highest point on the Trail Ridge Road, 12,183 feet above sea level. There's no marking there, and if you didn't bother to look at your mileage gauge, you'll soon be able to tell we passed that high point by the action of your car. Once we've passed it, it's all downhill from then on. Let me just take a moment now to tell you what a nice group you've been so far. I haven't heard a single complaint out of one of you, and in my business, that's very nice. Because of the unusual topography of this region, snow begins to accumulate as early as autumn in certain places. It doesn't melt until the following summer or later. As a result, this region has a very short growing season, and not many plants adapt to this situation. On the other hand, these areas give plants considerable protection from the extreme alpine winters because temperatures underneath 2.5 feet of snow never drop below 27 degrees, no matter how cold it is directly above the snow. As you can see from looking around, there are a few perpetual snowfields. In fact, at our next stop, Lava Cliffs Overlook, a mass of compacted snow resembling ice remains most of the summer, and the melting of this persistent snow is what in some years forms a tiny pond called Iceberg Lake. About the only time of year we can catch a glimpse of the lake is in mid or late August. The rest of the year, it's just one big stretch of snow and ice to the human eye. The lake itself is 350 feet below the Overlook parking area. The volcanic rocks surrounding and towering above this lakelet are different from the schists and gneiss and granites we've seen to this point. This volcanic material probably came from the same volcano as the one that forms Specimen Mountain, about 4 miles west. At Lava Cliffs Overlook, you'll get a magnificent view of Fall River and the one-way up Motor Nature Trail. This Fall River Road was used as a testing area for cars and drivers, and was especially popular back in the 1920s when it was first opened. If you'd been driving along that road then, you'd have seen many a Model T Ford driving up a hill backwards, because in those days, their reverse gear had more power than its low gear. In spite of the difficulties and hazards, the road was a favorite of those daring motorists, dusters, and disguised by goggles.
This is the high point of Trail Ridge
Lava
Road.
Cliffs Overlook parking area, sign number 7. Look back at the
Right
smooth
now.
turns of the road we've been on and compare them to those sharp switchbacks of the Fall River Motor Nature Trail. You'll understand why Auto Tape Tours chose the Trail Ridge Road.
I'm just a few seconds behind. You'll see Lava Overlook when I turn this corner.
From the parking area of our next stop, an easy
lava
erected in
cliffs
honor
there.
of Roger Walcott Toll, Superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park. At this point, our elevation will be 12,110 feet. Forgive me if I sound a little fraternal, but I want to warn you not to overtax yourself in this high altitude. If you have a heart condition, stay near your car. If you're robust, you can take a slow round trip over this highest nature trail in the world. At an easy pace, this trip should take about 40 minutes. At Rock Cut, you may get to meet some of the park's little animals. This is a favorite hangout of the yellow-belly marmot, a sociable little rodent who thinks that this parking area is a terrific spot for making friends with tourists who invariably hand out peanuts and other edible goodies to the friendly animal, against park regulations, of course. You'll recognize the yellow-belly marmot by its reddish underparts, grizzled back, and bushy tail. These little fellows are comfort-loving creatures. They usually pack their dens with soft grass, store up a heavy layer of fat in the summer, and hibernate during the cold winter. Their short, sharp whistle can be heard a mile away. In this high altitude, you might also see the pika. It looks like a small grayish guinea pig, but it is really a close relative of the rabbit. Pikas seldom, if ever, hibernate, although it lives usually in high altitudes, mostly above tree lines. If you glimpse a pika anywhere here below 9,000 feet, you can be sure the little fellow is lost. Rock Cut is one of the pika's favorite spots. Here it greets the traveler with shrill shrieks as it luxuriates in the sun. During the summer, several species of birds take up residence in the tundra, but they're too chicken, or too self-indulgent, or too smart to stay through the frigid winters. Only the stoic white-tailed ptarmigan makes it a year-round residence. These alpine grouse, mottled brown in summer, turn pure white in winter, and because of this natural camouflage, they seldom show alarm or fear when closely approached. From Rock Cut Parking area, you'll get a magnificent view 2,000 feet down into Forest Canyon, across into Gorge Lakes Canyon, peaks along the Continental Divide, and the Never Summer Range. The Never Summer Range was named by the Indians because it's never free of snow. A beautifully simple and logical name, isn't it? Enjoy yourselves. I'm going to rest my throat for a little.
Rock Cut is just ahead.
As we're leaving Rock Cut, notice again how this road cuts through some weird rock formations, and you'll understand how this section got its name, Rock Cut. We're now heading for Forest Canyon Overlook, where we'll see some more of the natural phenomena of Rocky Mountain National Park. This road we're on, Trail Ridge Road, is something of a phenomena itself. Traditionally, this road is officially open to tourists about the last of May and remains open for travel until the end of October. Sometimes an early snow will close the road for travel before that time. The opening of the road symbolizes the meeting of East and West. National Park snowplows and snow clearing crews work for several weeks clearing the road, starting at each end of the road. Finally, on the appointed day, cars travel from Grand Lake on the west side of the divide and from Estes Park on the east side and meet at Fall River Pass if weather and road conditions permit. There, the barrier ribbon is ceremoniously cut and the road is declared officially open. Incidentally, I didn't mention when I was talking about birds that there is one species that breeds only on the high mountains of Colorado, the brown-capped rosy finch. Ornithologists from all over come here to observe them in their natural habitat. Nesting in cliffs above tree lines in summer, they band together in autumn to descend into the ponderosa forest for the winter. Another bird commonly seen in the tundra is the water pipit, a small ground bird whose white bordered tail is almost constantly wagging. By late August, they abandon the high altitudes and don't return until the following June. At Forest Canyon Overlook, our next stop, a five-minute walk along an easy path will reward you with another breathtaking view into the depths of Forest Canyon and across to the rugged walls of Hayden Gorge. When taking your walk, thanks, I'll stay here and wait for you. Be sure to stay on the path. Tundra areas are fragile and may be permanently damaged by being walked on repeatedly. It takes several hundred years to achieve the growth you see here, so do be careful. Meet you back here in a little while.
You'll see the overlook in about 300 yards when I turn the corner.
As we ride along, feeling like we're on top of the world, you can look about you and see the park's boundaries. With the multitude of imposing peaks, mountain climbing is a popular sport here. It was Paul Pizzot, mountain climber and guide emeritus of the Teton country, who once wrote, "There are old climbers and there are bold climbers, but there are no old bold climbers." With this simple philosophy, the National Park Service urges all climbing enthusiasts to observe all the safety rules of the park and to call on them for information regarding the best and safest routes. In addition to the beauty of the tundra, superlative
This
views
is
spread
Forest
out to the
Canyon
south
Overlook
across
to the right.
Forest Canyon, including one of majestic Long's Peak. The naming of this peak is an important first in the park's history. In 1819, President Monroe sent Major Stephen H. Long to explore the boundaries of the Louisiana Purchase. Major Long entered what is now Colorado in the spring of 1820. While camping near modern Greeley, he sighted the Great Peak. Members of his party named it Long's Peak in honor of their leader, and it became the first park feature to be named or written about. As we continue down, we're coming to the end of tundra country, and we'll soon be back into forest areas. Notice how the trees grow near the upper limits of this region, twisted and grotesque. Often flat and ground-hugging, they sprawl behind boulders. This is characteristic of all alpine mountaintops, and such trees are often called Krummholz, a German word for deformed trees. While spruce and pine are the most common trees in this area, the limber pine is the most interesting. It's the only 5-needle pine in the park, and near tree line, it's easily identified by its distorted, twisted, ragged appearance. The name limber pine comes from the ease with which the branches can be bent without breaking. Its cones are often 6 inches long, the largest of any conifer in Colorado. For visual proof of how destructive wind can be, look over the trees along the ridge to the right. In this region of the park, high-velocity winds, 50 to 70 miles an hour, occur all year. And don't get nervous. Summer velocities are more commonly between 15 to 30, so it's not very likely you'll be blown away. Notice how the trees in exposed locations have limbs only on the lee side of their trunks. The limbs on the other side have been killed by fierce winds. These trees are known in alpine climate as banner trees. The wind, by etching out the soft wood, also gives the dead tree trunks along the road their weird appearance. Where trees are sheltered, they grow in their normal shape. Protection from the elements is important for survival up here. At Ghost Forest in Hanging Valley, we have a vivid example of another great destroyer of trees, fire. Once, this was a living forest, but a fire which swept the canyon over 50 years ago reduced it to a graveyard of wind-whitened stumps. Talking of this kind of tragic waste, I can't think of a better time to remind you of Smokey the Bear's ABCs of fire prevention. A. Always hold matches till cold, then pinch it to make sure. B. Be sure to drown all campfires, then stir and drown again. C. Crush out your cigarette, cigar, pipe ashes. Use the ashtray of your car when you're in forest country. Remember that only you can prevent forest fires. Just ahead is Rainbow Curve, sign number 4. When the clouds are right, this parking area is a splendid spot for seeing some of the most hauntingly beautiful rainbows you'll ever see. So, slow down, stop, turn me off, and look for the rainbows.
Not quite the Rainbow Curve yet, I'll let you know.
The rocks piled up on the ridge to our right look so much like gravestones to some people that it was named Tombstone Ridge. The name was popular in the late 1920s.
This is Rainbow Curve.
Considered renaming the road we're on and calling it Tombstone Ridge Road. While it's probably a more dramatic name than Trail Ridge Road, it's not exactly a pleasant or attractive name. As a matter of fact, in recent years, the name of the ridge itself, Tombstone Ridge, has become so unpopular that the Park Service now refers to it in several of their publications as Monument Ridge. So to all intents and purposes, I guess we can say that Tombstone Ridge is dead. As we approach Upper Hidden Valley, you'll see the terminal building, or the T-bar lift, which leads near to the top of the ridge of the Big Drift. Ski trails lead down from Upper Hidden Valley, making it possible to ski from the Big Drift all the way down to the lodge, more than 1,600 feet below us here. Upper Hidden Valley and its Big Drift is considered by ski enthusiasts as one of the finest ski areas of the Front Range. Tows, shuttles, and rental shops close down in the middle of April, but skiing continues through May on the Big Drift when the slopes are accessible by car. From mid-December to mid-April, Hidden Valley is a popular place with families. 5 days a week, Wednesday through Sunday, there's ice skating, ladder sliding, and snowshoeing for everyone in Lower Hidden Valley. From the National Park Service about winter activities in Rocky Mountain Park. In fact, while you're here, you really should get to know more about the interpretive programs available to you. These free activities range from exhibits to all-day guided hikes into the rugged mountain wilderness. Other activities you may enjoy are campfire talks given by ranger naturalists at various campgrounds in the park, short nature and wildlife walks, auto caravans in the alpine region, and photography trips into the wilderness. Bulletin boards throughout the park, you've probably seen some by now, tell you where, when, and what's going on. around here are populated by many small animals. The spruce squirrel roams both the lodgepole pine and higher spruce fir. Even in the bitter winters, this rugged, predatory little animal refuses to hibernate, and frequently, after a severe cold wave or storm, you can find the spruce squirrel sprinting across treetops, hunting small birds which it will devour. Incidentally, there are 226 species of birds in the park. Most of them, like you and me, are just summer visitors. Look over to your left. Do you see a range that looks like an Egyptian mummy lying on its back? No? Come on, look again. It really does look like an Egyptian mummy lying on its back. That's why it was named the Mummy Range. Haig's Peak, the second from the right, at 13,560 feet, is the highest mountain in the Mummy Range. Did you know? No, how would you? That the famous Stanley steamer was built primarily for use in this region? Freeland O. Stanley, one of the inventor brothers, owned the Stanley Hotel. He used his automobile to bring his guests from the railroad station in nearby Lyons and to take them on sightseeing trips along the foothills of this park. Stanley's fleet of automobiles were equipped with telephones, which could be attached at any point to the telephone lines in the vicinity. This was a valuable gimmick to have in case of breakdown. Mr. Stanley had one outstanding idiosyncrasy, particularly strange for a man who invented and presumably believed in his own automobile. He refused to drive backwards. To avoid it, he installed a turntable in the garage of his Estes Park home. Wonder what Dr. Freud would have made of that. We're getting close to our next auto-tape tour stop, Many Parks Curve. To some Easterners, that sounds like an odd name. It comes from the fact that from that spot, we get great views of the many meadows below. In the west, a mountain-enclosed meadow is known as a park. So, Many Parks Curve. Get it? At many parks, you'll have a good opportunity to get a close look at some of the area's wildlife. Undoubtedly, you'll find chipmunks and ground squirrels hanging around waiting for handouts. I know it's tempting, but please, it really is against park regulations to feed them. That rule is for your protection as well as for the protection of the animals. At the parking area in Many Parks Curve, you'll find a sign that tells you about the many wonders you'll see from there.
And this is Many Parks Curve.
The trees you see to your left are lodgepole pines. As you can see, they have tall, straight, slender trunks with little foliage except near the top. They stand so close together that lower limbs of earlier growths die. Because of their root system, they're not very well anchored, and the forest floor is usually littered with trees that have toppled over. Indians use the slender trunks of smaller trees for the framework of their teepees or lodges, which is how it gets its name, lodgepole. It's the only two-needle pine in the park. The needles growing in bundles, seldom over 2.5 inches long. The cones are small, and some of the older trees will keep several hundred closed cones on the tree for a number of years. Although normally most pine cones mature and are shed in 2 years, many of these lodgepole cones remain closed on the tree until exposed to considerable heat. A mineral soil exposed to direct sunlight is particularly favorable for lodgepole pine seedlings, and these trees are one of the first to repopulate burned areas. Under normal conditions, the lodgepole makes such dense shade it can't reproduce and ultimately gives way to more shade-tolerant trees like spruce and fir. If you were to walk in this forest, you might possibly find the only two members of the orchid family found in the state of Colorado, the pink and yellow lady slipper. The latter was once a common flower in the Rockies, but it's rarely found now. The calypso, a delicate pink blossom, is also difficult to find. But if it's to be found at all, it would be around here. Along this stretch of road, the peaks of the Mummy Range and the Bighorn Mountain form an awe-inspiring skyline to the north. Bighorn is one of the favorite wintering grounds of the bighorn sheep. The spur road to the left, sign number 2, leads to the lodge in Hidden Valley. Here you can take advantage of their picnic and other facilities. During winter, this is a popular ski resort with facilities for beginners as well as experienced ski buffs. You can turn me off now. This section of the park is similar to Kawanichi Valley, where we started our auto tape tour. During this drive, you may have run into rain,
to Hidden Valley
hail,
Lodge.
snow, wind, and sun.
To the left.
Did you realize that each time you ascended 1,000 feet on Trail Ridge Road, you experienced the same climate and conditions as if you'd driven 1,000 miles northward? By the time you reached the highest point, the conditions were the same as if you'd traveled 4,000 miles north. And in case you're interested, 4,000 miles north of Colorado would land you at, are you ready? The Arctic Circle. During our drive, you might have seen beaver dams and ponds near the road. These dams are constructed by, you should pardon the expression, eager beavers. They are made mostly of mud, parts of aspens, and debris. Usually they're started on shallow creeks, and as the water level rises, so does the dam. At the beginning, it's not much more than a solid heap of debris. Then, the busy little beaver chews and digs out a few underwater tunnels, as well as one or more rooms with the floor safely a few inches above water level. In this dry, enemy-protected retreat, the clever little beaver lives and rears his family. Although his home is dry, the beaver is well adapted to its surrounding water environment. His hind legs are webbed for efficient swimming. His tail, broad and horizontally flattened, assists him in underwater maneuvering. Swimming on the surface of water, a beaver is not exactly a speed demon. He usually goes at about 2 miles an hour, which certainly won't win him any speed contests. Before you strain your eyes trying to spot a beaver at work, I must tell you, chances are you won't see him. The beaver works mostly at night. At Deer Ridge Junction, the Trail Ridge Road ends. At that point, you have a choice of roads to take you to Estes Park. The first takes you past the junction with the old Fall River Road, through Horseshoe Park, past Sheep Lake, and eventually to the Fall River entrance station. On this route, you'll see beautiful Chasm Falls. If you leave the park by way of the Beaver Meadows entrance station, you pass a spur road that leads through Moraine Park and Glacier Basin to Bear Lake, nestled at the foot of the high mountains. Any visitor to Rocky Mountain National Park who has the luxury of an extra hour or so should make this trip. The glaciated meadows and moraines and the splendid view of Long's Peak make this side trip well worth taking. Another worthwhile visit in this area is to the Moraine Park Visitor Center, where you'll see ancient glaciers, both on exhibit and from the observation porch. The park headquarters is located a short distance past the Beaver Meadows entrance station. The next sign marker doesn't indicate a stop, but rather the end of Trail Ridge and the junction with the two roads that lead to Estes Park. Now, you can turn me off until we reach sign number 1. At that point, you can turn me on again. When we get outside the boundary of Rocky Mountain National Park, we'll be heading for Estes Park. As I told you before, this delightful western town was named after its first white settlers, the Estes family. In 1859, Joel Estes and his son Milton were on one of their frequent hunting and exploring trips. They came to the head of Little Thompson Creek and climbed to the top of a hill. Looking down, they were overwhelmed by the astounding natural beauty of the valley below. About a year later, the Estes family built their home in that valley. After a few years, either because of restless pioneer spirits or because of the high altitude, they moved and sold the property to Michael Hollenbeck. The land then went through the hands of several owners, none of whom, it seems, actually settled there. The real history of Estes Park began to unfold when Griff Evans bought the original Estes holdings and sold it to the famous, or infamous, Earl of Dunraven in 1876. As you know, the burgeoning Dunraven dynasty began to fall apart when other settlers thwarted his greedy efforts through legal action. Finally, after almost 2 decades of control, Dunraven sold out and cleared out, and a straggling group of rustic log buildings began to develop into a tidy, small western town. In 1909, F.O. Stanley, co-inventor of the Stanley steamer, built the luxurious Stanley Hotel, establishing the area as a fabulous family resort. As its popularity grew, so did the little village and surrounding areas until finally, in 1917, Estes Park was officially incorporated. Today, it's still considered one of the finest family resort areas in America because of the many historical and educational attractions, sports facilities, and sheer entertainment it offers visitors. The local citizens of Estes Park share a feeling of great pride in their community and extend typical Western hospitality to the tourists and visitors from all over the world who stop there. In Estes Park, you'll find accommodations to fit all tastes and budgets, and modern shops to furnish you with everything from camping equipment to formal clothes. There are restaurants, inns, snack bars, and picnic grounds. For adult evening entertainment, there's a first-run movie house, live productions of Broadway shows, cafes, and, well, just about every form of entertainment you could ask for at a vacation resort. For the children, Estes Park is a paradise, offering horseback rides, hiking trails, swimming, boating, fishing, souvenir shops, and an atmosphere of true Western friendliness for all. The Estes Park Chamber of Commerce is staffed with local citizens who are anxious to help make your trip one of the happiest of your life. When you get out of the park, look for the Auto Tape Tour concessionaire. There's one outside the Fall River entrance and one outside the Beaver Meadows entrance. You'll find their names at the bottom of your rental agreement. When you return the player and cassette to the Auto Tape Tour concessionaire, he'll return your deposit.
That's the turn to Old
I
Fall
hope you
River Road
enjoyed our auto
to the
tape
left.
tour, and I hope we'll have the pleasure of making similar trips together in other national parks. Thanks for being so nice. You may turn me off now.
To the right is the Fall River Visitor Center.